How are you doing, Mama? Sending a child off to school in just a few weeks or even days? Feeling heavy, excited, nervous, ungrounded? In today's episode, I talk with Angie Andrews, owner and chief magic maker at Angie Andrews Inspire. Angie is an energy worker, a truth teller, and a soul doula. Her passion is supporting women in birthing the next version of themselves by connecting with their deeper voice and intuition, allowing them to feel more joy, ease, and beauty in their lives. She's also the mama of 2 boys, one of whom has flown the nest. She shares practical tips to support yourself during this time of big change, which I hope will be just what you need. Shout out to Sarah Grebe, my acupuncturist, who shared a quote with me today. You're not an empty nester, you're a bird launcher. May you take good care of yourself as you launch your bird, Mama. And I hope this episode helps you to do just that. Welcome back to Midlife by Design. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We are bringing to you an episode that will hopefully serve as a survival guide for moms who are sending a kiddo off to college, to work, to wherever, someplace not home. And I have with me today Angie Andrews, who is a friend, and we know each other because our sons played lacrosse together. And also she's an amazing human being. So I want to welcome you, Angie, and give you a minute to introduce yourself, and then we'll jump into all the feels with sending kids off to college.
Thanks, Lori. So my name's Angie Andrews. Aside from being a mom, I have a business in which I hold retreats and sacred space for women. I'm also a Reiki master and offer energy healing both here at my home and do distance work, as well as in a variety of ways, including women's circles. Just really enjoy holding space for women to connect, to share, and to be seen and heard. So that's my business.
Yeah, and your gift.
And my gift.
Yeah, truly, truly so good at it. I have been the lucky recipient of some of those gifts and very much appreciate them. So, Angie, you have 2 boys. You've sent one child off to school. You've got another who's going to be a senior. So, I'm curious about the story of sending your first child off. As much as you can recall, especially the days and weeks kind of leading up to it. What did that look like? How was the process for you?
I actually sat this morning and kind of to jar my memories, scrolled through pictures, right? I went back to the year we brought Cam to school for the first time and started looking through pictures. The days and weeks leading up to it, I think, were filled with all sorts of feelings. I think there was a lot of anticipation, excitement, fear, anxiety, and just sort of navigating the unknown. And that's both for myself, my husband, and Cameron. And Evan, who's my other son, the one that's going to be a senior, at the time was only 11. My boys are 8 years apart. And so for him, it was a fairly significant change, but also he was 11. So there wasn't a whole lot of, discussion of how he was feeling at the time. And then when it came to actually bringing Cam, I think, we live in a small community, right? Our kids go to a fairly small high school. He was moving to Boston University, which has 35,000 students, into this giant high-rise, dorm building. So it was a lot of change all at once. We had sort of a transition because Cameron did take a year off. And so he had traveled to Japan by himself with a backpack for almost 4 months and had done some things on his own. So I think he felt somewhat prepared, but when we got there, it was, complete chaos and just an entire day of waiting for very busy elevators to go up this high rise with these giant, almost like bins like you would see at the postal service that you would throw all your stuff in and then go up and it's an old building, so these tiny elevators. So it's just a lot of logistics and being tired. So I think it was easy to just stay focused on what we were doing, right? And then once his room was sort of settled and we went out to lunch and it was time to leave, I think that's when uh, sort of the lump in my throat and feeling in my chest that I had been ignoring all day was like, oh, how am I supposed to do this? You know? So yeah, leaving him there was really hard. And honestly, it never got easy. I mean, every time we would drop him off sequentially, for his sophomore year, junior, never felt easier to me than it did that first time. And even now he's 25. And when he comes home and we send him back to LA, I have the same feeling.
Yeah.
So, so, and then coming home was just really hard because, you're used to a house with 4 people, have 3 people. It's a totally different vibe. So it was hard, but it was also very exciting. And, I mean, the whole point of all of this is to watch them spread their wings. So,
Right. I was talking to somebody this morning who also has older children, and we were just talking about how your children are they're their own humans, right? And this is their first opportunity to really step into that, and that it's a time for us as mothers to be able to reckon with the idea that they come through us physically often. However, they are not us, right? They are their own humans and really need to be able to do this thing. So,
mhm,
and plus also it's not only an identity shift for them into adulthood, it's also an identity shift for us. So I just wanted to acknowledge the way that you explained the day and how it unfolds, because I think that's probably a very similar experience for everyone moving their kid in. You can stay focused on the task at hand and the general busyness of it until you can't. And
right.
right.
Yes.
And then the emotions. And I know we've talked about playing around with how much do you emote in their presence, which could potentially add on to the load that they are carrying versus
Hmm.
how much do you try to just put it
Yeah.
in your proverbial backpack and wait until you hit the car. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that, and then we'll talk about supporting yourself.
Yeah. I'm not very good at, well, it's kind of twofold for me. I grew up with a mother who did not emote at all. And so I was sort of taught that that's not okay. And not because she told me it wasn't okay. It was just what I pulled, right, from
Modeled.
watching my mom, is that it's really important to be strong and not cry. But at the same time, I'm a crier. So
Mm-hmm.
so, like, it's very difficult for me not to emote when I'm upset. So, when it came to dropping Cameron off, I think I tried really hard not to completely break down, but he knew there was no way that when I hugged him goodbye, his mom wasn't going to cry because I cry at everything.
Yeah.
So, I think the fact that he knows I'm pretty soft and that I emote often watching TV or movies or, like, whatever, like, I don't think it made him feel worse because he just knew that was going to happen. Because leading up to bringing him, every time we talked about it, like, I'd well up. So,
Yeah.
um, he kinda knew what he knew what was coming.
Yeah. And from a human design perspective, you are an emotional authority. Your emotional solar plexus is defined. So part of what you are here to do is to show people how to emote, right? How to have all the feels. And those who don't have that center defined are here to let that feeling come in and then let it go. So I suppose there are lessons for both parents and children in learning how to handle those emotions. And they are
Mhm,
complicated, like you all also said, because it is exciting. There's
mhm,
definitely a lot of excitement and probably a lot of kids who are raring to go and so excited and can't wait to see their parents leave, and also some sadness and some
mhm.
fear. And so coming back to that idea of supporting yourself, I'm curious, how did you do that?
I think leading up to and after, I just stuck with what my normal practices are. So, like my daily practice of making sure I took time to sit in this corner, to journal, to be quiet, to be reflective. Sometimes that means pulling an oracle card, or it means different things different times. But really just allowing myself time to be reflective and write out how I was feeling, because for me that's how I process my feelings the best. And so I did that. I think also, if I'm honest, there was like a really large dose of just avoidance that went on in the weeks leading up to him moving out. Obviously, I couldn't avoid it anymore after the fact, but leading up to bringing him to school, I really stayed focused on, like, did he have everything he needed, and making sure that all the packing lists were made, and all of the logistics, because that allowed me to sort of not be thinking as much about the emotional aspect of him. So I really used my own self care practice as sort of a grounding mechanism. And that's kind of what I do for everything. But also, I mean, I think there was a good amount of just, I don't want to think about this right now. So I'm just going to stick with logistics and business. And
Mhm. Those things that you sort of have more control over, right?
hmm
And you can go into super mom mode, be
hmm
to provide and make sure that, like, this last time that they're headed out, they have everything they need.
yep.
Right. Yeah.
hmm
I love the idea of continuing your practices, because obviously getting ready for school is a super busy time. There is a lot to do. I mean, I'm looking at the forms I have to fill out by Monday, and the doctor's notes that I should have gotten 3 weeks ago, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And it is easy to put all your focus on that and let those self-care practices go because
hmm
you don't have time or whatever. And I think it's super important to prioritize those. And I love the sitting in stillness or pulling cards, or if you have a really defined route, getting out and exercising, those kinds of things
Yep.
that will help those endorphins still fire, right?
Yep.
So, this idea about the identity shift that happens, obviously, you still have Ev at home. So, there's not an identity shift necessarily from being a mother of two kids who are out. However, there's a shift in the vibe you mentioned earlier. It's a different feel with three of you in the household. And
hmm
now you are taking on this identity of the mother of an adult who's across the country, literally, and now this mother who is mothering a high school student getting ready to go to school. So I'm curious about that shift for you and how you found balance in navigating the new chapter.
Yeah. I think for me, also, it's a little different than a lot of parents because my boys are so far apart, right? They're 8 years apart. So when Cameron left, Evan was still in middle school. So he still needed a lot of mothering. You know what I mean? He wasn't a teenager who was starting to do things on his own. He couldn't drive. He couldn't, none of that stuff.
Right.
So there was still very much with him the same mothering components that there were with Cameron
Mhm.
growing up. The energy in the house was definitely different only because Cameron carried a very distinct energy that's very different than Evan's. And I missed that terribly. I think we all did. So we all just kind of ended up settling in. And then there's the part about parenting in a whole different way, right? Because even though the kid's at college, technically he's doing all these things that you've always done or helped with.
Yeah.
Um, and so parenting becomes very different. And I think it's been really eye opening to me. I think you always thought that, like, once you launch them, that the job gets easier, but it doesn't get easier. It just shifts. In fact, I think parenting adult is in some ways harder because I'm sort of a mom who parented through nurturing and through doing things for my boys and cooking and like doing all these things. And when they're an adult, you can't do that. And it becomes a very different conversation. So that's been an unexpected for me and something
Mm,
that we've had to learn to step into.
yeah.
They have to become adults and they have to adult on their own. And so you sort of in a whole different way have to take a step back and parent in a different way. So I mean for now I parent Evan in one way and Cam's relationship is just a completely different thing.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the questions I had for you was around communication. And
Mm,
it feels like the type of communications you have to change, right?
mhm,
Because you're unable to do those things for them, to
mhm.
take care of them in that way. So I'm curious if you could just reflect on that a little bit.
Yeah. And when I read that question, thought it was super interesting because I think that's something that we never thought about ahead of time.
Yeah.
And, I think communication between moms and boys or even dads and boys is just very different than girls. Like I used to check in with my parents all the time, right? Cam would go days, sometimes a week, and I wouldn't hear from him. And
Yeah.
so there just had to become this understanding that like if I message you and say, "Hey, like everything good," that I at least just quickly get and I'm good because I'm like if you don't answer me, I'm assuming someone's taking you and you're not okay.
Right.
Um and so yeah, I mean the conversations shift much more from how can I help and support you in the traditional ways to what can I do for you when I'm as far physically in the United States as I can be, or in the case of college, even, a 3.5 hour drive where it's not like I can just come take you to the doctor or bring you groceries. So yeah, it becomes a whole different conversation. And I love the idea when I read the question of like with Evan, maybe ahead of it being like, here's the expectation. Like I would like to hear from you that you're alive. Like every couple days a text would be nice.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Establishing some sort of expectation before you go. So to
Yes.
prevent disappointment potentially or
Yeah.
misunderstanding. However, I think you have to be careful with how much expectation you have
Yeah.
there, right? Like
Yep.
it's that piece of letting go, which whatever. I have so much cancer in my chart, like letting go is not is one of my big life lessons, put it that way. So one of the other questions I have about something you mentioned earlier was just missing that energy and missing that vibe, and curious how you hold that. How do you hold that feeling of
Mm,
missing, and what did you do to support yourself through that?
yeah. It wasn't easy, and to be honest, it's still not. And, Cam graduated from high school in 2017 and went to college in 2018 and basically hasn't lived at home full time since.
Mhm.
Um, and I still miss his presence to this day. And I don't know that there's anything specific I did to support myself, but what I did do was allow myself to just be sad. And like,
Mm.
I think I told you this story. I would go in his bedroom and sit on his bed and smell his pillow. My husband thought I was losing my mind. But for me, it was just like, it smelled like Cam.
Yeah.
And that brought me comfort. So
Mm.
I think it's one of those things where over time it just gets easier. And then what I've struggled with is that then when they come home, at least for me, it resets everything for me.
Mm.
And then when he leaves again, it's like the whole thing again. And I'm 53. And when I go home to my parents' house, my mom has always said to me, it never changes. When you leave, I'm still really sad when you leave. And I was always like, well, that's crazy. I'm a grown person with a family. But like,
Yeah.
I get it now because Cam's
Yeah.
25 and it's like the same thing every time he leaves. So I think it's just a getting used to it and allowing yourself to just feel it. And then if I'm missing him really badly one day, just texting him and being like, hey, what's up? Can we like hop on the phone for you so I can hear his voice? You
Mm,
know?
yeah. Okay, you're
Yeah.
making me teary. Um, I was sitting outside today and the boys both have all of their lacrosse gear out on the porch still. And it is stinky at lacrosse moms, right?
I know.
We know how it goes. And I was just sitting on the little couch out there and surrounded by some sort of smelliness. And I was kind of like, oh, actually, I'm not going to move. I'm not going to move his bag. I'm just going to like sit in the smelly for a little bit, you know? Um,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. And I have to share another story of this woman, and her name's Melissa, and she talks about dropping her first child off at school, and she was leaving the campus and she made her husband run the red light because there were no cars coming. She was like, if you stop, I will jump out of the car and run back. I know I will. So please
Oh
don't
no.
stop. You have to keep driving. So, but it's grief, right? And
It is.
right. And I think we have to come to terms with that it's just part of that process. And if we name it that and accept that it is
Yep.
grief, that then maybe it does make it a little bit, maybe not easier, but we're able to name it and then understand that there are lots of different phases, right, that we are
Yes.
experiencing. And
Yep.
it's not sequential. Like you said, it resets every time he comes home. And
Hmm.
that in and
And
of
that was unexpected for me. Like I don't.
right.
So yeah.
So I guess allowing it to be however it will be and understanding that the beauty of feeling that way is just the indicator of how much you love your kid, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So you said that Ev was 11 when Cam left, and there was a difference in the vibe. But how did he do with the shift? Now he's an only child, so to speak, with all
Hmm.
the attention on him. How did he do with the shift?
Yeah. That's what's super interesting about the gap between these two is like Cameron was an only child for the first 8 years of his life, and then now Evan's gotten to be the only child for a number of years. I think in the beginning, he definitely missed Cam. He didn't, he was 11, so he didn't express it that much, but you could tell that he missed having his brother around. But also, I think there was a piece for him that was like, wow, I have everything to myself because the boys don't have TVs in their bedrooms. Like we have one TV that's central in the living room. Cameron was the older child, so he often got his way. Um,
Right.
and so, Ev now had like the TV and the Xbox and all of these things, and it was like, oh, this is kind of cool. So I think for him, it was two things. It was he missed Cameron because they did hang out and got along, but also like Cam's 8 years older than him. Cam would sometimes feel more like he was trying to be Cameron's parent than his brother.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
so their relationship was just very different. But you can see it now that Evan is older too. When Cam comes and goes, I think it's more emotional for Evan because I think they're
Hmm.
becoming more friends
Closer.
than,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. As he gets older. Yeah.
yeah,
That makes sense.
yeah.
And in human design, when you have two people that come together, you get your electromagnetics. So any place that you have gates that are hanging, they're like little tendrils reaching out for other people to complete the channel. And so when you have two people that come together, they lock in. When you bring three or more people together, it defaults to what's called the penta, which is basically the middle centers of the human design chart, where they link all up, and it's really that energy that takes over. So it is very much an energetic shift
Hmm.
in the vibe when you take a person out of that pentagroup, and you
Yeah.
go from 4 to 3. So just recognizing that. And then I think, I mean, in my mind, I feel like September, October are really going to be transition months where we have to kind of get our bearings. And granted, I will say that my son Emmett, he hasn't been around a lot this summer, So I feel like he's kind of giving me an on-ramp. He's
Yep.
spending a lot of time with his friends. He's just keeping busy and
Mhm.
probably like we talked about earlier, kind of doing all the things before they leave their friends, right? And
Yes.
this whole group that they know. So there is a bit of an on-ramp, and I think that it will still be a significant adjustment. And so just building in knowing that you're going to need a little extra patience and a little extra room and a lot
Hmm.
of curiosity about how to navigate that.
Yeah, and there is that blessing, like you said, of most of their friend group is going somewhere or doing something. And so it's like
Right.
this, I need to be with these people all the time and we need to do as much as we can before we all go. So it's like this little, okay, he's never home. Um, and then there's also, like you said, the energetic part, right? So even though Cam wasn't home a lot his last summer home, still knew he was always still home. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, that's that's the big change is like it's not just their physical person. It's the energy that they bring to the whole container of the house that I think is hard to get used to not having around.
Right. Actually, that makes me wonder about Reiki. If you were you able to use any of that, or have you, yeah,
I do
how
use the practice for myself when I'm having any kind of upheaval or even with health stuff, but just setting the intention of ease and comfort and
Mm.
acceptance, and then doing a session for myself and having those be the core intentions of the session. I think it's helpful for me. And honestly, journaling too, just writing out whatever it is that I'm feeling is for me is therapeutic.
Right on. How about celebrations? Were celebrations important in the transition? Tell me about that.
We had not as much celebrations, but just making sure everyone who loved Cam got to gather with him before. So my parents came over, and we did a big barbecue where Cameron had some friends over and my parents were here and we did that. And then as a family, just the four of us, we let Cameron pick somewhere to go to sort of have his last meal in the valley for a while. So
Mhm.
we all went out to Flatbread as a family because Steve used to work at Flatbread. I used to work at Flatbread. The place sort of like home to the boys. They spend a bunch of time there. So
Mhm.
we did that. But aside from obviously his high school graduation party, it was more small family gatherings and making sure he was spending time with people that he knew he'd miss. My father-in-law, prior to passing away in 2022, also lived above our garage. So Cam spent most of his life with grandpa around too. So he was part of that whole process of helping send Cam off to school too. So
Yeah. Oh, good. I guess that would be another potential recommendation is making time and looking down the road if you've got a couple weeks to go, planning for those gatherings so that they have a chance to say goodbye for now or so long or
right. Yeah, because like in the case of my parents, we knew it would probably be Thanksgiving or Christmas. I mean, I knew
Right.
I'd end up going to Boston to see him before that. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Since Cam has been gone for a few years now, on a practical note, how did you navigate does his room stay the same?
Mm.
How about that kind of thing?
So this is another one where I think our situation is a little different because we live in a small log home, and so the boys actually have share a room. It's
Hmm.
literally runs the whole length of the house, and it is split in half by like this giant piece of sail material, so they each had their own space. But I literally didn't change Cameron's side of the bedroom at all until I think it was about a year ago that I finally said to him, I'm going to take everything off the walls and like all of that. I'll put it in a Rubbermaid bin. It'll be in the
Mhm.
basement because Cameron saves everything.
Mm,
Um, I was like, I'll have it all in a bin and then if you can keep what you want. And then if you don't, whatever you don't want. So literally now his side of the room is Evan's workout bench.
mm,
And we left one of his signs up from the state championship lacrosse game above his bed.
nice.
But
Yeah.
otherwise, I kind of packed everything. But it took me, I mean, he's really been not here full time since 2018, and it was only like a year ago that I was like, okay, I think it's time to like
Ah,
taking some of this stuff down.
yeah.
Um,
Okay.
yeah.
So giving yourself some room, right, to make that choice as long as you have the literal room.
Well, and I wanted him also when he came home, like I wanted him to feel like he still had a place that was his.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. Last question here about this new chapter for you. Obviously, Ev is a senior, so he will be moving out and moving on. And
Yep.
so, are you starting to think about this is going to create more space for you in a lot of ways? And what kinds of things are you hopeful
Yeah.
for?
I
Tell me.
mean, obviously we'll create a lot of space because like Evan's lacrosse and all of that
Right.
is a huge commitment, not just for him, but for our family. And
Mhm.
having all of that off the table. I mean, Evan's been driving himself around for a while now, so like that piece is already like we have so much more freedom because of that. But just it almost feels like it will be too much free time. So,
Yeah.
part of me is just like, what the hell are we gonna do? It's just the two of us here. Um,
Yeah. What are
but
we gonna do?
also,
Who are you
yeah,
even? Do I
yeah,
like
yeah,
you still?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, all
yes.
those things.
So, but also like it frees up space to be like, okay, so then if we don't have this kid at home and I mean, we still have full-time jobs, but outside of that, what are
Yeah.
some new things that maybe Steve and I want to do together or that I want to get involved in? And for me, that usually means thinking about how do I want to evolve my energy work practice? And do I want to add another modality and go back to school to learn something new? Or I would imagine for me, that's what will shift and change. My like job will continue to be my job, but my soul work I think will be a little bit um easier to evolve without all of the time commitments that come with another kid at home. So
Right. Well, I can't wait to see what comes of that. And also, we don't want to rush it, right? You still,
no, I'm
you
not ready yet.
Yeah. Yeah. You still have another year. I feel like senior year, the kinds of decisions that they have to make during senior year, I feel like it's a nice transition year. They do a pretty good job of helping both parents and students come to the realization that this is real.
Yes.
School is ending. You are finishing up with your high school career and what's next. So
Yep.
it's yeah, it's exciting and like you said, all of the feels, all of the feels. So
For sure.
thank you so much, Angie. How can people find you and what kinds of things do you have in the pipeline here?
It's kind of easy to find me because everything is the same. So on Instagram, it's Angie Andrews Inspire. My website is angieandrewsinspire.com. So
Perfect.
everything's pretty consistent, which makes it easy to find me. At the moment, I don't have any retreats in the pipeline, although I might be doing one in late January, more to come on that. But I am assisting and holding space and creating the container for a beautiful retreat in October in Rochester, New York, that is a ketamine assisted journey retreat for women, a very small group of 8 women, and there's still a few spots left there. I'm super excited about that. There will be more to come on my website in late October. I'm going to be launching a mentorship study group with a friend of mine around the feminine and topics around the feminine, which I'm looking forward to. And then now and again, I hold women sharing circles here on my property in the yurt that I have in the woods. And I usually post about those on Instagram. So Instagram's kind of the easiest way to see what's most up to date with me. But my website does speak about the energy work that I do and the offerings that I have in that realm.
Perfect. All right. Well, I will drop all of those links in the show notes. And thank you so much for sharing your experience. I so appreciate it. I feel like as women, the more that we can talk about these things and help normalize all of the different feels that we're feeling, the
Hmm.
more permission, right, we give to one another, and witnessing without judgment is happening. And that is the beauty of the defined emotional solar plexus that we both have. So yeah.
Absolutely. And you're welcome. And thank you for having me. Just like you said, women sharing stories and being able to talk about things and listen and support each other is part of what's missing from our lives. And so I think the more spaces that we create for that, the better off we'll all be.
Mm. Aho, sister. Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much. I hope this episode of Midlife by Design helped you with some practical ways to process some of the big feelings that this time of year can bring. If you're crying at random commercials, if you're laughing when it doesn't feel appropriate, if you're just feeling off, I see you. I am you. I'm right there with you. And I'm also holding space for all of it. And I encourage you to feel through all the feels without judging yourself. This is a new chapter for you and your kiddo. You are blessed to have made it this far, and there's so much more joy to come. I'm sending you big, juicy generator hugs as you navigate through, and I'm wishing you the strength to let go, the joy you deserve, and the clarity to continue to be who you came here to be.